Let's come back up to the conditions and take a look. Let's do this. Let's create a point helper out here. And we are going to then come over to the helpers, take a node, and with that node we're going to pick that helper. So now this node contains all this information about this point helper. And what we're going to use now is we're going to use a condition called, well, let's actually back up. Let's make it a little simpler. Let's go ahead and just use particle age first. Particle age is very useful. We'll go ahead and do this. We'll say the particle that we want to be looking at is the red particle, so we'll make that connection. And then we want to go ahead and use the particle age to create a Boolean. So we'll connect that to position born, so that's going to control position born. And let's take a look at the particle age parameters. We've got born, die, enter group, relative, and absolute. Born, of course, means when these red particles are born, then I want to go ahead and output a true value. We'll actually change this position born. We're going to make it a pistol shot. We'll just create a few more particles, and let's set their lifespan to be kind of short and have them go in all directions. So what happens is that red particle, he flies out, and you can see he's created a little burst of green particles in the beginning there. Let's come up to particle draw and actually remove that first particle. What we're going to do is we're going to scrub out in time to frame 20, and then we'll create a red particle. So that red particle is going to actually be born at frame 20. And now, as he comes out, you can see very clearly, bang, he's born, creates a bunch of green particles, and then continues flying on his way. So that's what the particle age set to born is going to do. The next option is die. And so that when that particle dies, then I'm going to output a true, and position born will create some particles. Let's actually modify particle draw where we set the lifespan for that red particle. Let's make him only live 10 frames. So now what will happen is, remember, he gets born on frame 20, so we come out to 20, he lives for 10 frames, and boom, on frame 30 he dies. And when he dies, this condition says, hey, you know what, this particle just died, output a true. And so position born is going to create its little burst of particles there. And then the next method here is enter group. Enter group is interesting because if you have, let's get a little complicated. Let's go ahead and create another rule here, and let's do this. Let's wipe out that node, and we're going to make another group. We're going to call this blue. We'll come up here, and what we want to do now is we'll right click and disable this rule so you can just ignore it for now. And we're going to come back to particle draw, remove that one particle at frame 20, we'll recreate him at 0. And of course we're borning a red particle, and so now red is born and starts off with a little velocity just like before. And of course his lifespan is kind of short, so let's go ahead and change that. We'll make it 80. What we're going to do here in the next rule is make a pretty simple rule that says when a red particle, and let's expose his age output. You can see we've got all these different outputs for the particle group that we can pass on and use in other operators. When the particle age reaches a certain age, then we're going to send him into the blue group. And let's actually change that blue group color. Okay. The way we're going to do that, we come up here to the standard operators, and we're going to use a group operator. This takes particles and it's going to put them in a certain group. We'll say put you in the blue group. Okay, so red. Now we need to actually have a way to control this when this turns on. This is another good way that we can actually look at particle age. And we'll go ahead and make that particle connection, and we're going to use the age to control when that group turns on. And we'll say, okay, a relative is an interesting one. Let's go ahead and do that. Hopefully this isn't too complicating, but it's pretty simple. Relative takes a look at the particle age and goes from 0% to 100%. So we could say, well, and we know that that particle's lifespan is going to be 80. So if we come into the particle age and say, well, relatively, once he reaches, let's say 50, anywhere from 50 to 100%, so if his lifespan's 80, then 50% is going to be frame or age 40 for him. So once he reaches 50% of his lifespan, go ahead and output a true. And what will happen then is that it's actually going to take this red particle, put him in the blue group, and then this rule is no longer going to apply to him because he's no longer a red particle. He's a blue particle. Let's go ahead and just kind of see what happens there. You can see that the particle is born at 0. We get up here to about frame 40, and boom, he turns into a blue particle. That's because his particle age has reached his 50% relative age, which would be 40. And so the red particle, we look at his age, and then what happens is he outputs a true, and so then the blue turns on. Now he's a blue particle. Okay, we're slowing down there, but let's get going. Okay, we'll enable this next rule again, this one that we had been originally dealing with. And we've got this red particle out here. Let's go ahead and change this now to a blue particle, because what we want to say is when a blue particle enters the blue group, when he enters the group that he's in, then I want something to happen. So this is very useful when particles change groups. There's a lot of different situations where you'd want to change groups. Maybe a particle hits something, or a particle turns a certain age. We want to send them into a different group. It's very useful for crowd animations as well. Okay, so we can see now, what do we expect to have happen? Well, we've got the red particles born, starts off with velocity. When the red particle reaches 50% of his lifespan, outputs true, goes into the blue group. And then this blue, now, when he enters his group, he's going to give birth to a bunch of particles. So let's just see what happens. Once we reach frame 40, boom. The red has changed into the blue, and he gives birth to a bunch of green particles. So, working just as expected.